Rivalries are the lifeblood of college football. It's a phrase you hear over and over again, and it's because it's true. It's the thing that drives a lot of what makes college football special. And even as someone that grew up on the West Coast in Oregon, I have to admit, nobody does rivalries quite like the SEC. And so that's why I wanted to lead this series with the SEC, rating every single SEC rivalry on a tier list like we like to do on this channel. So let's go through and rate every single SEC rivalry. We'll start by taking a look at our arbitrary tier names like we like to do on this channel, starting at the very top, which is fever pitch. The rivalry has reached peak maximum value, maximum stakes, and maximum hatred between the two brands. Then there's the boiling point just below there. It's still a rivalry with a ton of bad blood. Maybe it's just been a little one-sided recently, or maybe hasn't had the same national stakes that the top tier ones have had. We've got our heated rivalries. These are still games that are really heated between the two programs. They really do not like each other. We've got needs a spark, where the rivalries may be a little bit dormant just because there hasn't been something big to happen in a while. These are going to be a little bit more one-sided. Still, maybe there's a lot of passion there. And then the final one is on simmer. Some people might not even know some of those rivalries exist, and in some cases it might just be they haven't played each other very much recently, or they just haven't had a reason in a while to get really locked into that rivalry. So without further ado, let's get into the list. Last thing I wanted to add before we get into the actual tier list is that there are going to be some games missing from this list that some of you might consider to be a rivalry, and you might be baffled by its exclusion, but I just tried to include like the 20 or 30 best or most notable rivalries in this list, and so if it's not in the list, it means I probably just consider it in the on-simmer category. I'm thinking of a matchup like Mississippi State, Alabama, or maybe Tennessee, South Carolina. Not super historic, but there's been some good matchups recently. Last thing I wanted to add, let's go ahead and get into it. Let's start with on simmer. On simmer, we've got 6 rivalry games here in the SEC that are just completely on simmer. They're not close to being near its boiling point. There needs to be multiple years of build-up or good things that happen to get this rivalry revived. There's a few great rivalries that are just completely dormant, like Georgia versus Auburn. I know there's a ton of passion in that rivalry. I know there's a ton of hate in that rivalry. But the reality is, Auburn just has not threatened Georgia in this rivalry game for far too long. And as a result, it's just one that's taken a back seat recently. The same goes for Tennessee versus Kentucky. It's just been too long for the Wildcats not being overly competitive in this rivalry. Texas A&M versus Arkansas is one they've tried to make happen with the neutral site game in Dallas, but A&M is just taking control. Same with Tennessee Vanderbilt. I know Vanderbilt gave them a good run this last season, so maybe you could argue it's closer to needs a spark than on simmer, but still been relatively one-sided to Tennessee's favor. Missouri versus Arkansas is one that they really tried to make happen, scheduling that at the end of the year every year when the SEC West was a thing, but it just never really clicked how you wanted to, and Missouri was pretty dominant during that stretch. And then finally, there's Mississippi State versus LSU. This is one that I just think less people are aware of, and it's because there hasn't been much reason. The most notable result I can think of recently was maybe that 2020 game where Mississippi State lit up LSU, but not many super memorable results from those guys. So some one-sided affairs, some rivalries that people maybe don't know as well. This is the same tier that any rivalry that you think is a rivalry in the SEC but isn't on this list is probably going to end up. Rivalries are a crucial aspect to college football. Without them, the sport just would not be the same. It's kind of like how therapy can be crucial to your mental health, and that's why I want to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, BetterHelp. BetterHelp offers therapy that is fully online, which makes it comfortable and convenient, and you can freely search your options without fear of judgment or pressures or people snooping around and seeing what you're doing in your personal life. BetterHelp connects you to a network of 30,000 plus licensed professionals with a wide range of specialties and backgrounds. As always, they carefully make sure that each one of the professionals on the platform is well qualified, and their customer support team is always there if you ever have any questions or issues that you run into. Once you've filled out their quick and easy questionnaire, you'll be matched with a therapist in as little as a couple of days. And there's no need to worry about being matched with the wrong therapist or something along those lines. There's no fee to switch at any time if you feel like it isn't a good fit. Start any day of the year fresh with BetterHelp. Use the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/CFBudge for 10% off your first week of therapy. A huge shout out to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. So let's get to the next tier of rivalries, which is needs a spark. These are rivalries where still there's disdain from at least one side, if not both sides in the rivalry game, but there hasn't been anything crazy that's happened recently to get you up and get you involved and get these fan bases involved. Like, the hate is there for Arkansas against Texas, I have no doubt. But Texas has no reason to really fear Arkansas as of late. They're just a program that's on a different level, and when they played them this last season, they didn't have any real issues. Now, I know what happened last time Texas went into Fayetteville all those years ago when they weren't both SEC opponents, but Texas currently has the upper hand and doesn't seem like they're too threatened by Arkansas. You could say the same thing about LSU versus Arkansas. The battle for the boot just feels like Arkansas hasn't been as relevant in that game as they need to make it happen. Oklahoma versus Missouri delivered an awesome result the last time we saw them. It's just been, they have not played enough recently, so we need to see a little bit more from them. And then Georgia versus South Carolina, not even on the schedule this year, and I haven't heard a ton of people complaining about it because Georgia has kind of handled things recently, albeit South Carolina's given them a couple scares. It's another one of those rivalries that has kind of suffered just because Georgia's been so dominant. Let's get into the next tier of heated rivalries. We've got 5 in here. We're starting to get to the really legit stuff where it's going to be pretty much a must-watch game this season just because of the state the rivalry is in. These are going to be rivalries that are heated with multiple recent memorable finishes. Tennessee versus Georgia has produced some great games. The Volunteers have been right there. Still one that's a little bit more one-sided than you would like it to. Like, Georgia has not lost to Tennessee in a couple of seasons, but the Volunteers have been more and more competitive as their programs ascended. You can feel the stakes start to rise in those games. I'm thinking back to that game when Tennessee was the #1 team in the country and they had a battle with Georgia. So Volunteers starting to make that rivalry a little bit more relevant. South Carolina versus Missouri, I think, is an extremely underrated SEC rivalry, and it's one where it feels like they always beat each other at the most inopportune time for the other team, and it just makes it so entertaining. Georgia versus Florida is another one where Georgia recently has just had a stranglehold on the rivalry, but the Gators are right there. It does feel like, I think they're closer than most people would consider them as a program to being at Georgia's level, and they've had a few games recently where they've really tested the Bulldogs, but again, Georgia's dominance keeps those ones pinned down a little lower than they might traditionally be. We've got the Egg Bowl, Ole Miss versus Mississippi State. Yes, Ole Miss has won a couple of years in a row. Yes, it feels like their program status is rising. Mississippi State's is kind of going down, but I'm still remembering that the Bulldogs have several recent wins in this series, in this rivalry, and are still a relevant team there. And then, of course, there's Kentucky versus Florida, a game where these guys obviously don't like each other. They've traded blows a couple times recently. Kentucky is a program kind of in some turmoil. You could argue Florida's had the recent turmoil there as well, but the rivalry's still been solid and has still delivered some memorable results recently. Getting up to the second to last tier, we have the boiling point. Games that have reached a really, really fantastic level. This is where some really fantastic rivalries are. We've got 4 of them in this tier, starting with Ole Miss versus LSU. There has been some ridiculously exciting, fun, high-flying games. The game this last year was an instant classic, ends in overtime. I'm thinking back to that incredibly high-scoring game they had a couple of seasons ago as well. Ole Miss versus LSU doesn't get talked about as much as some of the more high-profile rivalries in this conference. It's still a really great one, and there's high levels of disdain and hate for each other. I mean, I remember there was a video that literally went viral of an Ole Miss fan crying about how much she hates LSU this last season when that game went down. Alabama versus LSU is on here. Just a classic SEC rivalry that just feels so good to watch on a Saturday. Bama just won the most recent edition. They've won the most recent 2, but I think back to the Jaden Daniels 2-point conversion to beat Bama a couple of seasons ago. LSU definitely beats Bama in a lot of inopportune moments with the Crimson Tide. It's a historic rivalry. They definitely don't like each other. Bama has had the last laugh a couple of seasons in a row, though. We've got Bama versus Auburn. The Iron Bowl is always competitive, always a great game, and they just really do not like each other. The levels of hate pull this one up the list, despite the fact that, yeah, Alabama's gotten Auburn a few more times than they would have liked over the years, but it does feel like the Tigers, every 3 or 4 years, they still are able to get one and able to keep you on your toes whenever this game is on. And if Alabama didn't have that 4th and 37 or whatever it was conversion, they would have lost one very recently to the Auburn Tigers. And then finally, there's LSU versus Florida, another one that I feel like is overlooked a little bit, but the vibes of this game are insane, and Florida taking out LSU this last season when LSU was ranked and favored, I think really adds to the juice of a rivalry that is also really, really fantastic. And so we've made it to the top tier, which is the fever pitch rivalries. There's 4 in here. I know that some of these are going to create some controversy down in the comment section, so we'll go through one by one. But in essence, each of these rivalries are peak rivalries at peak hatred with peak national relevance, which is very high for each of these. There's college football playoff implications, there's rivalry implications, there's pride implications in all of these games. You start with Texas versus Oklahoma. Yes, I know the Sooners are coming off of a down year, but this is one of the top rivalries in all college football, and these guys also beat each other all the time, especially when it seems like it's the worst time to lose for the opponent. It is on my bucket list to go to. I want to go to the Cotton Bowl this year and witness this game. It is always a spectacle and a fantastic game between two programs that do not like each other at all. Then there's Texas versus Texas A&M. I know some people might not think this belongs on here, but truthfully, I just look at this game and it is so nostalgic to me. I love that it's back, and I truly do think these teams hate each other so much. I saw so much buzz from the offseason between these two fan bases about how much they despise each other, and you feel it. It's interstate. It's in the state of Texas. The Aggies hate the Longhorns, and the Longhorns hate the Aggies. Yes, Texas beat Texas A&M in College Station, and honestly, I think you could argue if Texas wins a couple more in a row in this, maybe A&M doesn't beat them the first 3 years that they're in the SEC, you could start to see this one slip a little bit because the Aggies need to deliver a counterpunch. Texas is operating at just a higher level as a program right now, and the Aggies don't have the recent wins over Texas like Oklahoma has to be able to hang that over their opponent's head. We've got Bama versus Tennessee. This one, I would argue, is probably the top rivalry in the SEC right now, just in terms of the current state. The recent games they've traded versus each other, when Tennessee's beat Bama, when Bama's beat Tennessee, and this has really emerged in just like the last 5 years because Alabama had that long, dominant stretch against the Volunteers, and Josh Heupel has awakened this program. They're competitive in this again. They're competitive in the national title picture, and they beat Bama a couple times, and I think that's really awakened an awesome rivalry that was just asleep for a long time there. And then finally, Tennessee versus Florida, another one that has been awakened recently. Florida had a long winning streak against Tennessee. The Volunteers were just in the dumps, couldn't get it done. All of a sudden, Tennessee's delivered a couple counter punches. Did you watch that game this last season? It was a classic, ends in overtime, just a great game, and I look forward to the Tennessee-Florida game on the calendar every single season. So there it is, the SEC rivalries tier list. We're tiering these in terms of their current state, not all time. So please don't freak out if the Egg Bowl or the Iron Bowl are lower than you think. Just remember, this is in terms of the current state of the rivalry. It's kind of how I like to look at rivalries, but they're all still great. I love a good college football rivalry, even if it's just on simmer, because you're always rooting for that key catalyst to give it the spark it needs or to create some more controversy than exists. But that's it for the SEC rivalries tier list. We're going to do this for some other conferences. We'll do the Big Ten next. We'll probably do the Big 12 and ACC after that, and then we might do some just non-conference rivalries and go ahead and rate those as well. But let me know down in the comments which one you'd like to see next, what you thought of this video. Maybe I committed just a horrible crime or something sacrilegious on here in terms of SEC rivalries. You'll just have to let me know, but that's my best guess about what those rivalries are at in terms of their state right now. That's all I have for you guys in today's video. Sorry for the little bit of a gap there. We went like a week gap without a video, had some family in town, got a little busy. We got plenty of more great content coming out in the coming days. So I appreciate you guys for watching, and I will see you guys later this week.